Hello and welcome everyone. So this is a practice exam walkthrough. Well, a practice exam with a solutions walkthrough covering the topics of price controls, taxes, welfare economics, that basically just means consumer producer surplus, deadweight loss, gains from trade, international trade, externalities, and public goods. So I've got the version of the exam here, if you want to go ahead and take a look at it on my Substack, and I'll put the link in this video, of course, and then I'll link up this video at the very bottom here so that you'll have the solution kind of linked up right here. So you can, if you go find the Substack thing, you'll be able to come back to the solution video or vice versa, however the case may be. Anyway, that being the case, I'm going to kind of skip away from this real quick and just go right to the solution. So if you want to take the exam or haven't yet, you have the opportunity to do that. All right, so skipping right to the solution. Here's the first question. In the city of Metropolis, the local government imposes a rent ceiling of $1,200 per month on apartments. Before the rent control, equilibrium rent was $1,500 per month. What's the most likely outcome in the short run? The best answer here is that we're going to get a shortage of apartments because the quantity demanded is going to exceed the quantity supplied. The story we can tell there is the equilibrium rent was $1,500. We set a rent ceiling at $1,200. Now, this is a below equilibrium price, and a rent ceiling, that's a price ceiling, doesn't allow the price to adjust higher, so it'll definitely be binding. We know at all below equilibrium prices, we're going to get a shortage, and so this is going to be the best answer here. Okay, state government raises minimum wage from $10 to $15 per hour. At $10 per hour, the quantity of labor demanded was 200,000 workers. At $15 per hour, the quantity demanded falls to 180,000 workers. What's the most likely result? Or this is kind of like what's the best explanation? Well, we're not going to expect, this isn't described as increased employment. This is definitely a change in employment, so it's not B. It's not an increase in business profits, actually. Maybe we could tell a story. We'd need something about is this an efficiency wage or something? It's possible they're doing more with less labor, but that's not the best answer here. Best answer here is, well, we see unemployment increasing. Firms are hiring fewer workers at the higher wage. Following a natural disaster, government caps the price of gasoline at $2 per gallon, despite the equilibrium price rising to $3.50 per gallon due to increased demand. What's the most probable consequence? This is kind of like my anti-price gouging example, like in the lecture notes, in the slides, or in the Substack. The idea is previously the market's in equilibrium, then there's this massive demand shock because of this natural disaster that creates a binding price control out of a previously non-binding price control, namely the anti-price gouging law, which typically says something like prices can't rise by more than 10% above the prevailing average over the last 2 weeks. That's pretty common for most states in the U.S. to have. That's usually how their anti-price gouging laws are phrased, more or less. Meaning, and also you have to have a state of emergency declared. Meaning, during normal times you've got during normal times you've got a non-binding price control, and then during emergency times you've got a binding price control. Anyway, the best description here is, here we have this massive increase in demand, price has to stay lower, right? The equilibrium price actually is a lot higher because of this massive rightward shift in demand, but the price is fixed at $2. That's going to give us a shortage. Quantity demanded exceeds quantity supplied. All right. Government establishes a price floor for wheat at $8 per bushel when the equilibrium price is $6 per bushel. What's the most likely market outcome? I did not have this graph in the exercise, like on the Substack, but I wanted to put this in the solution. I think the best way to do one like this, and actually maybe I should have done this for some of the previous ones, is to draw the graph. And so I'm going to put in the equilibrium price, P star is equal to 6. Maybe I should make this a little bit bigger. Maybe it's not going to show up so well. And then I'll go back. So we were told the original price was $6 per bushel, so that's going to be the equilibrium price. I just put in P star right there. Whenever I put in a price floor, binding or otherwise, I like putting this P lower bar or underlined, which tells me, firstly, we're calling our attention to the price of $8, but secondly, this bar is indicating the price isn't allowed to go any lower. It's stopping it from going lower. So if this is above equilibrium, it's certainly binding. The next elements that I always think is really important to do is when we're given a particular price we want to focus on, go ahead and find the quantity demanded at that price. find the quantity supplied at that price, sure enough, we're going to have a shortage. Now, who knows what those quantities are? I don't know. Like, it doesn't matter for the context of what we're developing. But definitely we're going to get a surplus of wheat because farmers are producing more than in the sense of quantity supplied than consumers are willing to buy in the sense of quantity demanded. A city imposes $1 per unit tax on electric scooters rented from sharing services. Before tax, the equilibrium price is $3. After tax, consumers are paying $3.80. Rental companies are receiving $2.80. We can think of this as PB, the price paid by buyers. We can think of this as PS, the price received by sellers. We want to know something about tax incidence. Well, the price paid by buyers is rising by 80 cents relative to what would have been the equilibrium. The price received by sellers is falling by 20 cents. So the larger share of the tax was going to be borne by buyers in this case, right? So the dollar is spread, right, between 280 and 380, with 80 cents of the dollar being paid by buyers. So consumers bear more of the tax burden than rental companies. Federal government imposes a 50-cent tax per unit, 50 cents per unit tax on bottled water. After the tax, equilibrium quantity sold decreases significantly. What does this tell us about deadweight loss? Okay, so what deadweight loss is tracking is inefficiency. And in this case, what we're looking for is there a really big change between the quantity that would have been traded in equilibrium and now the actual quantity traded? And if there's a massive decrease in consumption, we know there's a lot of potential economic activity that got destroyed. And if you saw this graphically, you'd see the demand curve is above the supply curve over all those units, indicating that there is mutually beneficial trades that simply didn't take place. And so anyway, we're expecting if we have the quantity sold decreasing significantly, I mean, that's relative to what the market would have done on its own in the equilibrium. That means we destroyed like a lot of economic activity that buyers would have been willing to pay more than it cost to sell. And so that's a lot of deadweight loss. The story for why that's happening, well, if the quantity of bottled water sold is decreasing significantly, the best story we're going to want to know is like something's elastic. In this case, like demand being super elastic, that makes the most sense. It's certainly not that demand is inelastic, because then buyers would just tolerate the price, or at least their portion of the price increase. Excuse me. There's no deadweight loss because the government collects revenue. I mean, that's nonsense, right? You can have deadweight loss and revenue from the tax, right? They both happen at the same time. The tax does not affect quantity sold. That's not true. We're told the quantity sold fell significantly. So clearly the best answer here is deadweight loss. On a later one, I'll talk about this in the context of the graph. I've got some graphs built in here later on. Government implements a $2 per unit tax on electronics. If sellers bear 75% of the tax burden, what does it tell us about demand and supply? Oh, sellers are bearing 75%. That's most of the tax. So demand is going to be elastic. Supply is going to be inelastic, relatively speaking. So that's the answer here. Actually, now as I'm going over, no, here, I was wondering, where's my graphs? Okay, there it is. Sorry. Right. Government places $1 per unit tax on bus fares. If the quantity of bus rides purchased remains unchanged, what does it tell us about demand? Demand's perfectly inelastic, right? So if it's non-responsive to the price change, that tells us that buyers have like a fixed quantity that they need to buy, possibly because of like a lack of alternatives or substitutes. And in any case, if the quantity purchased is nearly unchanged, demand's pretty near perfectly inelastic. Government imposes a per unit tax of 50 cents per gallon on gas. Before tax, the equilibrium price is $3. After tax, buyers pay $3.30. Sellers receive $3.80. What can we infer about tax incidence? Because 50 cents is spread between a 30 cents increase for buyers, 20 cent decrease for sellers. Buyers are bearing more of the tax. Right? We can think of 3.30 as PB. This is P star, and this is PS. And remember, like what we're comparing is we're just seeing PB, that's the price paid by buyers, minus P star, is greater than P star, the equilibrium, minus PS. Right? So vertically, I'll show this in a second. For a tax, PB is going to be the higher price. That's what buyers are paying. And then importantly, PB minus PS equals tax. Right? And so the tax is the spread, and then what we're interested in is like how much of that tax is going to be above the equilibrium price and how much is below. In this case, we had a 50 cents tax, 30 cents is above the original equilibrium price, 20 cents is below. All right, city imposes a $2 per unit tax on restaurant meals. If demand is highly elastic, supply is relatively inelastic. Who will bear the most tax burden? Sellers, restaurants. And this is actually plausible because if the city imposes a $2 per unit tax on restaurant meals, well, I mean, maybe there's like a suburb or another city nearby, or some place that you can go to avoid the tax if you'd like to. That's easy to do if you're a customer, if you want to go out to eat someplace. Really hard to do if you're the restaurant owner, right? I mean, whenever your lease is up, I suppose you can move your location, move your venue, but supply is way more inelastic than demand. Okay, state government imposes a $5 per unit tax on a luxury good. The pre-tax equilibrium was $100. After tax, it rises to $102. Sellers now receive $97. What does this indicate about the market? Well, the $5 was split between a $2 increase in the price paid by buyers and a $3 decrease in the price received by sellers. So here's the graph. Here's demand, here's supply. We have the price paid by buyers is 102, the price received by sellers is 97, right? The tax, I didn't label tax, but that's this red line right here. That's those $5 unit, or $5 right here. And then here is the equilibrium, the original equilibrium price without a tax. Here is going to be the equilibrium quantity, didn't label that. The quantity right here, I'd call that QT. That's the quantity actually traded, or the quantity with the tax. And we see, this rose, the price paid by buyers rose a little, but the price received by sellers fell a lot. So sellers bear most of the tax burden. Okay, so now as promised, this is maybe a good time for me to say a little bit more about like deadweight loss and those sorts of things. So firstly, just like on this graph, I don't know if I can label everything. I don't know. Maybe that's going to kind of move stuff around because this is not a PDF. And so my stuff, I don't know. Let's not do that. I'll say this is consumer surplus. This triangle right here is consumer surplus, right? This triangle right here is producer surplus after the tax. This rectangle, it's bounded by one side by the size of the tax, those $5, and then over the units actually sold. This big rectangle is tax revenue. This littler rectangle right here is the percentage of tax revenue, or the amount of tax revenue paid by buyers. And then this is the tax revenue paid by sellers. These two triangles right here are deadweight loss, right? So what I was saying before is as the quantity traded, that's going to be this quantity right here, lowers substantially from the equilibrium quantity, then this widens this triangle over which demand is higher than supply. And we know that this is going to introduce deadweight loss and inefficiency because remember, demand is measuring the vertical height anyway. The vertical height is measuring willingness to pay for buyers or their marginal benefit. The vertical height of supply is measuring willingness to sell or the marginal cost. So anytime the marginal benefit is higher than the marginal cost, you should sell those units because those are profitable, like mutually beneficial economic transactions can happen over this region, right? But nevertheless, they're not happening. That's why we call this inefficiency and deadweight loss. And the interesting thing is the trade-off between the size of deadweight loss and the size of tax revenue, right? Because like the further down QT moves, like maybe the quantity with the tax was actually right here. I got to shift this red line all the way down here. It's going to get a lot taller. It's going to be a lot bigger tax. There'd be a lot bigger deadweight loss, a lot smaller tax revenue. If we move this further to the right, it'd be a much smaller tax, much longer tax revenue rectangle. We'd have to actually run the numbers to see if it was bigger or smaller. And then certainly deadweight loss would be smaller. And the interesting thing is from the perspective of policymakers, sometimes you're interested in generating a lot of tax revenue. Sometimes you're interested in generating a lot of deadweight loss, right? Like if this is an activity that you want people to do less of, then it would make sense that you want to generate a lot of deadweight loss. If this is something that you want to generate a lot of tax revenue from, then you actually don't want deadweight loss because you want people to still be doing whatever is that activity so that you can get them to pay a tax on it. Okay, anyway, so government introduces a per unit tax on sugary drinks to reduce consumption. Demand for sugary drinks is relatively elastic. Supply is relatively inelastic. What's the outcome? Very big drop in sugary drink consumption. If that was true, this would be a situation where sometimes governments are trying to get people to consume less sugary beverages, so they'll have taxes. Famously, New York, Philadelphia, Cook County, briefly, home to Chicago, did that. San Francisco, Berkeley, previously. I'm not sure if all those jurisdictions still have sugary beverages taxes, but they all tried to have one or had one for some period of time. And if demand is relatively elastic, then you're changing behavior and not generating tax revenue. I don't know if that's empirically true. I don't know if you necessarily get a situation where people are avoiding the tax or if demand is relatively inelastic. I think it kind of depends a little bit on the situation. Anyway, so a competitive market for bottled water has an equilibrium price of $1.50 per bottle. Government imposes a per unit tax of 50 cents, causing the new equilibrium price to be $1.80. What does this indicate? Oh, this is going to be a situation where, the tax, 30 cents of the tax is going to be borne by buyers, 20 cents of the tax is borne by sellers, right? So here's the original equilibrium. Buyers are paying 30 cents more, and sellers are getting 30 cents less, right? This would be the quantity traded with the tax. This would be equilibrium quantity. This triangle's right here together is deadweight loss. This triangle is consumer surplus. This triangle is producer surplus. These two rectangles are tax revenue. The larger of the two is the top one, paid by buyers. The smaller of the two is the bottom one, paid by sellers. Oh, a question you might have had, and I forgot to mention this on the previous one. I did not model this as specifically a tax on buyers or a tax on sellers. I just kind of drew the tax in. And the reason why is it doesn't matter if this is a tax on buyers or tax on sellers in the sense of who's got the statutory burden. If we model this as a tax on sellers, we would have a leftward shift of supply where the new supply curve would be everywhere higher than the old supply curve by an amount equal to this red line. So I just put this tax line all the way across and I draw my line. And if I did that, the new supply curve would cross through right here, right? If I modeled it as a tax on buyers, I have to make the new demand everywhere lower by those 50 cents. And the new demand curve would actually cross through down here, right? And so whether I find where my new supply curve crosses and then deduct 50 cents for the tax to the government and reach this point, or if I find where my new demand curve is and I add 50 cents to pay the government, either way I end up with the same basic picture, which is why I just drew it like this. Okay, so as we said, consumers bear most of the tax burden. Instead of taxing electric vehicles, government decides to offer a subsidy of $5,000 per car. If demand is highly elastic, supply is relatively inelastic, who benefits the most? Well, lots of the subsidy is going to go to the seller. Supply is more inelastic, they're going to accrue most of the subsidy. I mean, buyers are certainly going to benefit too. So the weird thing is in the sense of tax incidence or profits, or if we're just paying attention to the money involved, yeah, a lot of that purchase price is going to go to buyers or to sellers. Matter of fact, also hopefully this isn't confusing, but if you have a subsidy picture, you're going to get the quantity traded on the other side of the equilibrium, and these things flip. So this would be the price received by sellers. This is price received by buyers because we're going to be hitting the supply curve. So this would be PS, and hitting the demand curve over here, that'd be PB. So for tax, the vertical axis is going to be PB, P star, PS. If you have a subsidy, the quantity traded is actually going to be over here, and then it'll go PS, P star, PB. Right? Okay, so anyway, this is a situation where the subsidy is going to accrue mainly to the inelastic side of the market, to the sellers. However, demand is really elastic, which means behavior changed massively as a result of this subsidy. So in some sense, we could say there's a lot more consumers whose lives have been changed because now they're buying electric vehicles where they wouldn't have been previously because demand is so elastic. In the sense of who benefits the most, in the sense of tax incidence or subsidy incidence, yeah, we'll say sellers, but let's not lose track of the fact that there's a quantity effect too. Okay, in a competitive market for handmade furniture, the equilibrium price of a table is $500. Maximum price a consumer is willing to pay is $800. Minimum price the producer is willing to accept is $300. What's the total surplus in this transaction? Okay, so who cares what the price is? Total surplus is the difference between maximal willingness to pay, $800, minus willingness to accept, $300. This is marginal benefit. This is marginal cost. The difference is $500. The other way you could do this is 800 minus 500 is 300. 500 minus 300 is 200. 300 plus 200 is 500. So you could either, to calculate total surplus, you could either take marginal benefit minus marginal cost, or you could take marginal benefit minus price, price minus marginal cost, and then add those two differences. All right. In an unregulated competitive market, what statement best describes efficiency? Well, if the market's competitive, total surplus will be maximized. Now, if you have something that will cause market failure, then you'll get inefficiency. But in an unregulated competitive market, if we assume the market is perfectly competitive and there's no market failure, yes, then total surplus will be maximized. A tax of $3 per unit is imposed on a good if demand is more inelastic. Who bears a larger burden? Consumers. Whichever side is more inelastic is going to bear the larger burden, so it'll go to consumers. A steel factory emits pollution while producing steel. The market price of steel is $100 per ton, but the marginal external cost, that's the externality, of pollution is $1.30. If left unregulated, what's the most likely outcome? Well, here we're just told that there's an externality, right? The true social cost, this is like the marginal cost, marginal private cost is $100. Marginal external cost is $30. The marginal social cost is the sum of those two. It'll be $130. If left unregulated, what's going to happen? We're going to get overproduction of steel beyond the socially optimal level, right? So this is just the negative externality graph is what we have in mind. Pharmaceutical company develops a new vaccine. Marginal private benefit is $50. Marginal social benefit is $80 due to reduced disease transmission. What's the most likely outcome without government intervention? Oh, without government intervention, we have a situation with a positive externality, right? The positive externality, what is it? Marginal social benefit minus marginal private benefit. So the positive externality here is $30 per dose. When we have a positive externality, the problem we get is underproduction. Okay, local government imposes a $20 per tax, $20 tax per unit of a good that generates negative externality. If the marginal external cost is exactly $20, what happens? Oh, you can perfectly internalize the externality. Right, so the issue is when there's an externality, the decision makers are not paying attention to the external cost. It's not salient and it's difficult to quantify, so they might as well just ignore it. They behave as if it's not there. But if we impose this tax, they still can't observe the negative externality, but they definitely observe the tax. So the tax is a proxy. And the sellers, the buyers, they can all behave as if they are paying attention to the externality, meaning the tax helps them internalize the externality. D. Beekeepers' bees pollinated neighboring farmers' crops, increasing farmers' yield. If the farmer values pollination at $200 per season, beekeeper can provide it at a cost of $100 per season. What does Coe's theorem suggest? Well, Coe's theorem says, if negotiation is costless, and if property rights are clearly defined and enforceable, our stakeholders, our decision makers can, through negotiation, through like private bargaining, come to the efficient equilibrium, right? And it actually doesn't matter who has the decision rights, right? So it doesn't matter who owns the bees or who has the right to determine what the farmer does with their bees, right? What the beekeeper does with their bees. All that matters is that property rights are clearly defined and enforceable, and negotiation is costless. And in that case, we're assuming there's some type of transaction that can bring us to the socially efficient outcome. The idea is the beekeeper is only going to pay attention to their private costs. They're not paying attention to the benefit, and they're paying attention to their private benefits as well. They're not paying attention to the benefit to the farmer. Now, what we see here, what's relevant, is the farmer's benefit is higher than the beekeeper's costs. So there's gains to trade available. And what we're assuming is the farmer can subsidize, can offer some transaction, can pay the beekeeper to maintain the bees, and to do more, have more bees or whatever, have them closer to the field, whatever is the case. And the idea is then they both benefit. The farmer's going to benefit from having the bees that they've effectively hired, and the beekeeper is going to benefit from the transaction, from the payment from the farmer. Okay. Factory's marginal private cost, MPC of production, is $50 per unit. Due to due to pollution, the marginal social cost is $70 per unit. What does this imply about the market equilibrium? Okay, so marginal private cost is $50. Marginal social cost is $70. The marginal external cost is $20. So we've got a situation where there's an externality that's not being accounted for. We're going to get overproduction. City government builds a lighthouse to help ships navigate safely at night. Lighthouse is available to all, regardless of whether they contributed or not. What type of good? That's a public good. So available to everybody, whether they contributed or not, suggests it's non-excludable. And we should probably have something to make us believe it's non-rival, but it sounds like it's available to everybody. Maybe we can get non-rival from that. I guess I should have made this a little bit more clear that it was non-rival. A public good requires non-rival and non-excludable. Private good is rival and excludable. Common resource is rival but non-excludable. Club good is excludable but non-rival. Local town plans to fund fireworks through voluntary donations. However, many residents enjoy without donating. What economic issue does this illustrate? That's free riding. So you've got a situation where it's non-excludable, so they're able to still consume the good, and they don't have any individual incentive to contribute because they're able to consume either way. So that's the free rider problem, which leads to under-provision of the public good. Public fishing lake is open to everyone. Over time, fish populations decline due to overfishing. What economic principle? This is the tragedy of the commons. Individual incentives suggest that it's good to keep harvesting fish. Group incentives suggest you should harvest fewer fish so that the population can regenerate. So it's a social dilemma. Tragedy of the commons is a social dilemma that leads to mismanagement and then deterioration of the common resource, which didn't need to happen. That's why it's a tragedy. Private gym charges a membership fee, allowing only paying members to access its facility. One person uses the equipment. Using the equipment doesn't prevent others from doing so. What type of good? This would be a club good. We're not meaning like simultaneously. We just mean like you've got a gym membership. Sometimes you use whatever is this equipment. Other times you don't. The fact that you use it sometimes doesn't mean that other people can't use it other times. That's how we're interpreting this. So that's why club good's the best answer here. Now, if it was the type of thing where we'd say only paying members can access it and only one person can use the equipment at a time, and we made that part salient, then the best answer would be a private good. Restaurant sells gourmet meals that are only available to paying customers. Each meal consumed reduces the amount for everyone. What type of good is this? That's a private good. Government introduces a toll road where only paying customers can access it during rush hour. Road is congested, reducing benefit. What type of good does this toll road represent during peak times? Actually, I don't like this as common resource, so I'm gonna change this. Actually, why? Only paying users can access it. If it's only open to paying users, it's excludable, right? During rush hour, it's highly congested. That's going to make it rival. So if it's excludable and rival, best answer is private good. Oh, that's not gonna save. All right, so National Park provides recreational activities to all citizens without exclusion. To maintain the park, government funds it through general tax revenue. What's the economic rationale for this approach? Park generates negative externalities. Free market would efficiently fund and maintain the park. Nope. Public funding prevents under-provision of the park due to the free rider problem. Parks to charge high fees, exclude non-payers. No. The issue is everybody's able to consume it, and it's funded through tax revenue. And the reason why is if everybody's able to use the park, if you had to pay to use it, how's this usually work? So the idea is it's not excludable, and we'll assume it's like the park is non-rival, but you can donate to support it, right? The issue is we wouldn't get enough donations, and so the public funding, what this means is we'll overcome the issue of if it was non-excludable, but it was like optional payment, like donations only. Things that are supported by donations only typically are going to be underfunded. So that's kind of the idea there. Okay, cities' groundwater supply is freely available for residents to use. Over time, the water level decreases significantly. What type of policy might best adjust this? Well, you could have a tax on water usage. Subsidies for waters. Increasing subsidies will make people do more of it. Making the water supply completely free, well, it is already. Allowing unlimited withdrawals by large firms. Nope, that'd make it worse. Having a tax of these, that's actually the only thing that would address this. And so that's how you could limit. You'd basically be trying to internalize the consumption externality. After a natural disaster, emergency response services are provided to all affected individuals, regardless of ability to pay. What type of good describes these services? Let's see. So I wish I didn't say like what type of good. I wish I would have said like what type of property. So if it's available to everybody regardless of ability to pay, that sounds like non-excludable. It's not clear that this is non-rival. In this case, like if we're assuming that there's not a capacity problem, then yeah, non-rival and non-excludable makes sense. It'd be a public good. However, if it was non-excludable but it was rival, then we'd have a common resource. So if disaster emergency response services were scarce, for instance. So a better question would have been what type of property, which property describes these services, and then I'd have like rival, non-rival, excludable, non-excludable, and the answer would be non-excludable. Okay, river is heavily polluted because of multiple factories dump waste into it without restriction. According to economic theory, what's one effective way to address this? Assigning property rights to the river and allowing trading of pollution permits. Yeah, so if we had somebody owns the river, maybe the government, and you're only allowed to pollute a certain amount, and then beyond that amount you get like heavily fined or something like that, because previously they're able to dump without restriction, then what'll happen is the factories that are able to mitigate their waste will do so, and then they'll sell their permits to factories that aren't able to. And overall, like even though like we might not feel great about people buying the right to pollute, overall, that would lead to factories specializing according to comparative advantage in mitigating pollution. It would lead to less pollution overall, at least in economic theory. Okay, so why do countries benefit from specialization and trade based on comparative advantage? They can consume beyond their production possibilities frontier. Okay. If person A can produce 5 paintings or 20 sculptures, person B can produce 4 paintings or 12 sculptures, who should specialize in sculpture production? I said this is a PDF. This is not my PDF. I've got my cursor here. Fine. So how do we do these comparative advantage ones? I like doing the opportunity cost principle kind of directly. So I have person A. Sorry, this is going to be loud on the microphone. I moved it to be away from the mouse because I use that a lot more, but now I'm going to be banging on the microphone. So sorry about that. It's basically the only way that I can work this out, though. Okay, so person A can do 5 painting or 20 sculptures. So what I like doing is I want to know who should specialize in sculpture production. So I'm going to divide through and I want to get this as a 1 to whatever. So I'm going to make this 5 divided by 20p or 20 divided by 20s. So that's going to be 5 divided by 20. That's 1/4 p or 1s for person A. What about person B? Person B, it's going to be 4p or 12s. So that's going to be 4/12 p or 12/12s. So it's going to be 1/3 p or 1s. Whoever has, so this is the opportunity cost of one sculpture for person A is 1/4 a painting. The opportunity cost of one sculpture for person B is 1/3 of a painting. Whoever has the lower opportunity cost, 0.25 is smaller than 0.33, has the comparative advantage. So person A has the comparative advantage. Okay, so now I've kind of messed this up. So let me kind of move this down. Hopefully this will be okay. All right, country A can produce either 50 loaves of bread or 100 gallons of milk. Country B can produce either 30 loaves of bread or 60 gallons of milk. Which countries should specialize in milk production? So we can kind of just look at this one. I don't have to bang around the keyboard for this. So It's 50 loaves of bread or 100 gallons of milk. So if I divide through, it's going to be like one or two, so it's going to be one or two, or it's going to be one half or one. Same thing here. I mean, the easier way to say this is 50 is half of 100 and 30 is half of 60. They have the same opportunity costs, so there's no one has a lower opportunity cost than the other, so no one has a comparative advantage. So it doesn't matter if they specialize or not. They could, but nobody has a comparative advantage. So there's no additional benefit to specializing in milk production or bread production or whatever. Okay, suppose country A can produce either 10 tons of steel or 5 tons of wheat. Country B can produce 8 tons of steel or 4 tons of wheat. Which statement is true? So we'd have to calculate absolute advantage. You have to calculate comparative advantage using the opportunity cost principle. Let's try to just like leverage what we did above. So we're going to do this sort of exercise. I'm going to get like a 1 to whatever by dividing through by some amount. So I'm getting kind of a ratio. And then looking at this, I saw 50 compared to 100. That's half of 100. 30 is half of 60. Oh, let's look at this. 10 is double 5. 8 is double 4. Okay, so nobody has a comparative advantage. So now we're not even looking at specialization. Absolute advantage is the only one that fits. Okay, but the other thing is, suppose maybe the numbers were different, so somebody actually could have had a comparative advantage. Well, country A is producing 10 tons of steel, where country B is producing 8 tons of steel. So country A has an absolute advantage in steel. Country A is producing 5 tons of wheat. Country B is producing 4 tons of wheat. So country A has an absolute advantage in wheat as well. So definitely in both. What's the primary reason countries engage in trade? It's to obtain goods you cannot produce efficiently yourself. You import those that you lack a comparative advantage in. If your price is above the world price, you import. You export goods that you have a comparative advantage in. If the world price is below or is above your domestic price, then you can benefit from selling abroad. A tariff is a tax on imports. What happens when a country imposes a tariff? The price of the good increases whether imported or produced domestically. The idea is the tax is on imports, but that's going to raise the price. At the higher price, then the domestic sellers are able to raise their price as well. So you either buy the good domestically and the entire purchase price goes to a domestic firm, or you buy a good that's been imported and part of the purchase price goes to the government. The rest covers the costs of the foreign seller. If the U.S. imposes a tariff on steel imports, who benefits the most and who's harmed? Domestic steel producers benefit. Domestic consumers of steel are harmed. Okay, so that's the end here. Hope you enjoyed. I hope you did well on this practice exam, and I'll see you next time.